So this conversation is called the uncomfortable conversation. It's an exploration of the ways that these conversations around marginalization and privilege in the world, but also within the context of the industry that we all exist in, why these are necessarily uncomfortable and how to get comfortable in that uncomfortability. So with that, I would like to introduce the three of the panelists from the first session, and then three newcomers, actually. We have Michelle Johnson, who you just heard from. We had Chad Trewick from Recipro Cafe, and Tymika Lawrence, who is the East Coast sales representative for Genuine Origin. So welcome them, please.
Is this on? Oh, it's on.
Okay. Great. So some people will say that, a panel is supposed to be 5 people, but I don't agree with that. So I really want to start it off with a question to you three as newcomers to this panel on why these conversations are necessarily uncomfortable for everyone that has them. And maybe also explore a little bit about how we can position ourselves in a way that we can engage in a productive way.
I think these conversations are uncomfortable because it forces those with privilege, like you said was a triggering term for a lot of people, to have to look inward and realize that no one wants to feel like they didn't put in hard work. No one wants to feel like what they did didn't matter, but really you have to give up something so that those without can get ahead. And that once you realize that, no one wants to give up power. Like everyone wants to make sure that they have their seat at the table and keeps it. So when we are having to talk about these types of things, those realizations are very hard to swallow.
Right.
And getting past that defensiveness is very difficult. It's understandable, but we have to do it.
Right. I mean, it's like Vava said in her talk that when she was working to empower women farmers in her communities, that the men were feeling very disempowered and they were feeling pretty agitated. Right. Exactly. Chad?
I think the conversations are difficult because they are, like Michelle said, they're kind of calling people on their bias and they're exposing their privilege. I have occupied a very confusing space through most of my adult life, where I can walk through the world with an enormous amount of privilege as a rich white male, for all observational purposes, a heterosexual male, and a lot of assumptions are made. And if I don't call people on that and have that uncomfortable conversation, then I'm in a situation where I have to pretend something that I'm not. It's uncomfortable to call people on it.
I think a lot of these conversations are necessarily uncomfortable because, to echo what they both said, nobody wants to acknowledge the fact that they may have played a role in the marginalization of somebody else, but there is also something, there just is not a reckoning with truth in general, right? So like, if we all knew the history of the United States, it wouldn't be surprising that there are certain communities that are marginalized, and structurally, from the federal government on down, you can look it up, that was done on purpose. Like Phyllis said, right, some systems do what they're meant to, and until you dismantle them, they will continue to do so, even if we put a better face on it. And I do think there is a degree of what, actually Andre mentioned it in that talk before lunch, where he said if we were forced to reckon with our consumption, so there are people who purposefully do not seek out knowledge, or rather subconsciously don't seek out knowledge because they know if they did, it would make an impact on how they, on the decisions they make and the things that they have to reckon with. And I do think that there is, I refer to it as cognitive dissonance, and I do think that there is a lot of subconscious distancing between the issue, specifically because it's uncomfortable, but it's important to, I mean, if you don't realize, if just having the conversation makes you uncomfortable, imagine the level of discomfort that other people must be living with, right? Like, if your comfort has been so prized that you literally don't understand the realities of the country that you live in, then how comfortable could everyone else be? And so it's like, this conversation is gonna have to be uncomfortable, and like Michelle mentioned, it's, we don't, there was someone who actually in this Barista Hustle group about the panel we were on last year was kind of like, these ladies just like to complain, and I'm like, what? If I could literally never talk about this again, I would be just the happiest. I love coffee. I love talking about coffee. I'm not too shabby at it. I would love to just talk about that, right? But I don't have the option of not talking about it. So like Chad said, it's like, it is also uncomfortable for us to have these conversations. And so it's uncomfortable on all sides. But I do think, in regard to like how do you have these conversations in a way that leaves people opening to listen to them? I think 2 years ago, Tymika would have said, well, you just have to be patient, you have to do this and you have to do that. But there is a degree of, you just have to get over yourself, right? Like the people, you don't want to talk about these things, but people are living them. And so it's like, I don't really care that you don't want to talk about it, because we're kind of tired of living with it. And if you would just amend your actions, we wouldn't even talk about it. But if you won't, and if you're going to make me do it, you just have to get over yourself. And so there is just a degree of that, right? Like it is an unfair ask of the people who are always maneuvering around the things that make life hard for them to then, when they bring it up to you, to only do it in a way that's comfortable for you, because that's the only way that you can listen. It's, I mean, there's really not another word. It's insensitive, right? And it's, the lack of empathy there is staggering. And so I do think, like, as much as I would love to always be able to have the conversation the way that I am now, when it's touching every part of your life, you can't always. Like, we're a human being with the same emotional capacity that is being tested often. And so then if people are reacting in a way that seems, you know, sort of dramatic, you have to imagine, like, if I were in those shoes, if I were always maneuvering around these things, if I always had to think about them, could I? I'm like, there are people who you get their coffee wrong and they lose it. And so I do think that there is, like, you just kind of have to get over yourself, and also really try true empathy and put yourself in that person's shoes and think, what must that be like? And would I always be able to be composed and patient if that were me?
Right.
I'm sorry.
So I want to open it up to everyone now and ask you, because of we intentionally focused on you know, this concept for the U.S. or retail market, but then also across value chains as well. And I want to know, there are people out there that, especially in the Barista Hustle group and in other areas on social media and in our lives, that say, you know, you're having a nuanced conversation about privilege, but there are people that are struggling to exist. Right? So where is this conversation, like, is there room for this conversation and that conversation? Or, you know, how do you navigate that sort of, that criticism of the type of level of nuanced discussion that we're having?
So, what this reminds me of, this was something that, this was a link that was sent to me recently, and I had placed it in our last newsletter at Barista Hustle, because I feel like it directly answers this question. It was a National Geographic article that was a photo essay about indigenous transgender women working on coffee farms in Colombia. So to say that, especially what was going on last year with, Dubai and the deferred candidacy policy, to say that, this is just an American snowflake conversation and that, that's just them being American. Like, no, these identities exist around the world and at our coffee farms. Like, how can you erase that? So yeah, we do have the space and the capacity to have both these conversations at the same time, because they are happening at the the producing end of the value chain as well as the retail. Mm-hmm.
And I think that conversation is only meant to derail. I can't see a way in which that critique is useful. Because there is nobody who would run their business this way, right? So if you were running a cafe and your heater stopped working, but also every day the register was off by $30, you would never say, gotta focus on one thing, so I guess I'll pick the heater. You would look at all the problems that are in the business that you're running and try to evaluate them all and fix them all, and even though you know that you might not be able to, you would never say, I can only focus on one issue. And so it's just a derailing thing to do, and it's a way to say, well, you have in this situation have relative privilege, so just stop talking and worry about people, and worry about the issues that are happening at origin. And I would, if you find yourself wanting to make that critique, I would stop. Simply because if a person is saying this, it means that. And I do think there is this thing where we're always like, let's tie it to a statistic, which I'm all for because the statistics are in my favor. But even if they weren't, I do believe in tying things to statistics to make them palatable. But I do think that even if it's an issue you can't understand, why wouldn't you not want to be empathetic, right? So if it's something that hasn't occurred to you, it's because it doesn't happen to you. And if it doesn't happen to you, it doesn't mean it's not real. And if it's enough for someone to bring up, that's it, right? Like, why does it need to be a ranking of like the things that make someone's life horrible? It just seems so petty.
Isabela.
I guess it's a very good perspective, but after what you're saying, I would follow up, because you were saying that we have to put ourselves in each other's shoes. And what I've been learning in our farm and in Brazil and in the countryside is that we have to wear their shoes and learn that from my privilege to theirs, there's a huge road. And I cannot jump from my side to their side, even if I'm wearing their perspective. Right. So what we learn is that how can I start shortening this road so that everybody will be able to talk about the difficult issues? Because what I learned is for a couple of years we do kind of a research in the farm, and we ask what people understand from being sustainable. And for 2 years in a row, it comes because we are paid in the right date, just like as if payment would be a sign of sustainability. Second thing is because you invest in irrigation. We were like, what's the point? Because it's the guarantee of my job. That's why they understand about sustainability. So what we've been trying to is, from this knowledge that they just want to feel safe because of their employment, we want to shorten this bridge into reach the tip of Maslow pyramid. So what we did is that we tried to start doing things that creates a link to the people that we work with. For example, we named our very best coffees after the women that works in the farm, that Chad knew that. So there was a Maria, there was a lot of brand names, and these little things creates a link to them, and by this link, we create a trustful path so that we can start inserting more difficult themes, like the feminism, like taking care of their health, like many aspects that you have to build this bridge into being able to talk to them. But what is our most important tool is the education. So we have a lot of programs in the farm, from giving scholarship to supporting school materials to their children, because we believe that with education, everyone will be able to make their own choices. We don't want to make choices for them, for no one, from pickers to managers. We don't want to do this. We don't want to do this anywhere. We want to give as much as knowledge and education, so from a picker to a small producer, they can find their own way, their best way for them to improve their business, to improve their life. And that's how we believe we are contributing.
Yep. I mean, Doug, for you?
Yeah, I mean, very much this question, I think, as Tymika said, I mean, is often very much meant to derail a conversation, to kind of not deflect and like, oh, let's talk about this instead. A lot of times it's just to shut down the conversation. And I think a lot of times, in the work that we've done, we'll often see, a news article maybe is released or something, and someone will be like, well, why aren't you helping this group? Why aren't you helping this group? Why aren't you helping this one? And I think very often for us, we have to respond in a way that says, we're not against working with any of those groups. This is the group of people that we were with, that we were equipped to work with, and to work with this issue of injustice, and not to put down the efforts that are taking place anywhere else. And I think I think if we try to say, okay, we can deal with a certain level of injustice here because this is really the real problem, I think that begins to make us numb to injustice in general. And it's just the ones that we've prioritized. We're like, we prioritize this one, so this is injustice. The others, we'll just be numb to that. And I think that's not okay.
Mm-hmm. Right. Jen, do you have a perspective?
No, everything I wanted to say, Tymika actually said. So
Okay.
Yes.
We'll let you go in the next round then. So in the call that we had last week, we started talking a little bit more dynamically, and Tymika, you said something provocative, shock, that you had a perspective that you're finding in your experience that the longer that people are in the coffee industry, right, or the more, I guess, the more recognized they are, the less that they actually pipe up about a lot of these injustices. And wonder if you could share about that, and then I would love to have your perspective, Chad and Jen.
Yeah, my reason for saying that is twofold. I think this came up essentially because Colleen was saying that she felt like a lot of the orgs that were put up there, basically that, yes, Colleen feels like the conversation is changing because all these orgs have sprung up. But this is actually something that Phyllis mentioned earlier, and I'm like, yeah, but those orgs are coming from people who are feeling all of these issues the most, right? So like, there are a lot of issues that when I started as a barista, I don't experience now in my role in the same way, right? So I have like insulation in my role that other people don't. And so there's like all of this organizing that we're seeing is totally groundswell coming from like the entry point at the coffee industry. And so when we're looking at conversations shifting, they are shifting, but to reference 4Barrel, it's because of the end users involved. So like a lot of the things that we're talking about today don't have anything to do with the end customer. So like the person that is taking that coffee from a barista or grabbing a bag of beans from the shelf, right? These are internal industry issues that that end users have no context for. These words mean nothing to them, right? And because they don't mean anything to them, we could not ever talk about these issues and not ever move the needle without it ever touching them, unless someone did some investigative reporting that somebody actually paid attention to. And so I do believe that, like, when we're having these sorts of conversations, that there is a hesitancy to call things what they are. There just is. And so it's not, I don't think that we will be insulated in that way forever. As globalization continues and as, coffee consuming goes up, I don't think it will be possible. And as producers get connected to social media directly, I don't think it will be possible to not have these conversations and to not actually name our issues. So I think it would be good if we would start, because I do feel like we could find ourselves in that place 20 years from now, 25 years from now, when everything is even more interconnected than it already is. And I do feel pretty strongly that, it is hard to get people to be upfront about that sort of stuff the longer they're in the industry, depending on the role that they have.
I want to piggyback off of that because as the chocolate barista, like, I'm no longer a barista and I have a different position now, so I'm not, directly engaged with what's happening to baristas, but that's where amplification comes into play. Because as you move up and you're in the industry longer and you start to gain a platform and have, the microphone handed to you more often, you can pass that along and help those who are still very much dealing with those problems be heard, instead of you just trying to speak for everybody.
Jen, I would love to hear your perspective as someone that's directly working with people and to amplify them.
So I mentioned earlier to make change where you can, and one of the organizations that I help with was on that slide, the Bay Area Coffee Community. I didn't start it, but I did help revive it 3 years ago. And these difficult conversations, or having space for something that's not just a throwdown for baristas, like maybe we can have some other events on baristas, like everyone needs to learn, and not everyone has the same access to education in their business. I think that's mine. So I think yielding space to some of these conversations, I was one of those people that Tymika mentioned I wasn't so comfortable in having this conversation 4 years ago. I still hate it. But I felt like my voice and my representation, anyone who looks like me, really, I haven't seen on stage. Actually, I'm thinking today, I am the only Asian American, I think, today, Asian woman. So visibility is important. Having your voice heard is important. Even when you're writing or marketing or organizing events, having people who don't look like you is important. For me, almost everyone looks not like me, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I think giving voice to, like, not just baristas, but a lot of people in the industry is important.
You just reminded me of one thing, if I may. And specifically, since when we're talking about, I think part of the reason why people are less forthcoming as they go through the coffee industry is that we make it hard for people that don't toe the party line of making people comfortable to have careers. And so and that won't serve any of us going forward. Like, and a really good example actually is like that Pepsi commercial from a few years ago, or I don't know, I don't know, the years are passing last year, 2 years ago, where essentially people kept saying, doesn't Pepsi have any, there was an allusion to police brutality, and one of the Kardashian Jenners gave somebody a Coke, and all of a sudden everything was fine. And it was really off the mark, and anybody that is in a community that's affected by those issues would know that it was off the mark. And everyone kept saying, don't they have any women or people of color or black people in Pepsi's boardroom or in their advertising room? And I'm like, I don't necessarily know that they don't. They actually might. But is it does the person feel comfortable saying something? So if, you know, like, if you can only do well in a company, and of course you're not going to be yelling at each other in a boardroom, but if you can only do well in a company by agreeing with your CEO or not saying anything that makes anybody uncomfortable or saying anything that's challenging, then that's what's going to happen. Even if the people are in your company, people who could stop you from making mistakes, and I'm going to bring up 4Barrel again because it applies. Women worked at 4Barrel. There were women on the management team at 4Barrel. And if there was one person with the foresight to say, that guy has to go, because this is gonna be an issue. But did anyone feel comfortable saying that? Obviously not. Or even if they did say it, were they respected enough for anything to be done about it? No. So a culture was at that company where even if someone would say something, nothing would happen. So we don't know whether they did or didn't. And this is like a major loss of income that could have been avoided in a place where the culture was, yes, you can disagree, yes, you can call out something that's wrong. And so it's like, I don't care, you could hire a room full of marginalized people if you don't respect their opinions enough, or if you haven't created an environment, or if you ever see someone not agree with you and you automatically are like, no, I can't accept that in an employee, then it doesn't matter, right? And so you still end up in the same positions anyway. So I implore everybody to take a look at like the standards that you have as far as, and honestly, the standards are not the same across the board. I have been told I've been emotional in meetings where men yell at each other. I mean, they're yelling, and I'm like, I don't know, maybe you don't know anger is an emotion. So if you're yelling, you're being pretty emotional. And I've never yelled in a meeting because I, black lady, cannot yell in the place I work, right? And so it's like, it's not even that these standards are applied across the board. It's fine for some people to disagree, and it's not fine for others. So you should look at the standards to which you're holding your marginalized staff. And if all they ever say is yes to you, you have not created a work environment where they feel like they have the right to disagree. Sorry, that's long.
Take us home, Chad.
Great. No pressure. Well, one of the things I think is really interesting, I have the perspective of having been in an industry for 25 years, and we're just now on the cusp of what I think is a growing call-out culture. And I think it's long overdue because to some extent the lack of equity and equal opportunity in our industry is pushed aside, and that lack becomes normalized, just like our crazy politics are becoming normalized. And the longer you're at it, the less attention is drawn to those things. And so we need for these things to be called out. We need to, those of us who are entrenched in the emotional work, we have to do the work to contribute to the conscientious and awareness raising, making ourselves uncomfortable, and hopefully making other people uncomfortable. It is no small amount of work, and I think it's been talked about on this stage, to have to consider, go through the mental list. Am I safe? Can I talk about this? These are my hosts. If I tell them this, are they still going to want to be my hosts? Right. And if we aren't doing those things and being our own self-advocates and contributing to the greater good, we're missing huge opportunities to be a stronger, better industry. And I think the stats have proven again and again that we need a diverse set of perspectives and life experiences to move through this world in a productive way.
Yeah, but just to close that out, I mean, this other thing that Tymika said, that there's so much about that is highlighted right now because it's consumer facing. Yeah. What about the flip side? What about the other piece where it's not?
Well, the fact that so Phyllis said in front of a stage, or on the stage in front of this group today, that we are operating within a colonial system, and that hasn't been called out in our industry for a very long time in a very public way. But the fact is that we, as an industry, on this end of the value chain, have made gobs and gobs of money on the backs of, in most cases, an exploited producer pool. And we haven't that's totally normalized in our industry. We can talk about this for years and years, and for 10 years I've been coming to Symposium, we've been talking about this, and the behaviors haven't changed. And so the fact that cheap coffee exists because we're all free marketers and there's a lot of supply of cheap coffee in the world isn't really making it okay that its value is below its cost to produce in the majority of places. And yet it's, yeah, the longer we go, the more normal it is.
Yeah. I wish we had more time.
We could talk for days.
We could talk for days and days, but we will talk tomorrow at the strategy sessions. But I just wanted to say that if anyone has been keeping tally of how many times Phyllis Johnson's name has been mentioned today, let me know how many times that's been. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.